Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, shalom. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. And congratulations to the leadership of ELNET for hosting this second policy conference, which focuses on European and Israeli perspectives on the security challenges in a holistic way. From the geopolitical threats and the cybersecurity and hate speech to the very concrete and pernicious threats Jewish Europeans face in their everyday lives. Cooperation and exchange about all those aspects between Europeans and Israelis is essential. We can learn from each other and support each other. For 13 years, the European Commission has been holding EU-Israel seminars on anti-Semitism between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the DG Justice, the Director Justice at the European Commission, to create synergies in our common attempt to cure this malicious disease. Open discussions will help Israelis to understand why Jews, amid all the challenges, continue to regard Europe as their home, and it will help non-Jewish Europeans understand the challenges Israel is facing on an everyday basis. In the past 4 years in this job as European Commission Coordinator on combating anti-Semitism, I noticed one thing. Few Europeans have actually visited Israel, but almost everybody has an opinion on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So I commend ELNET for bringing European politicians, policy and opinion makers to Israel to witness the vibrant and diverse Israeli democracy and society. These visits and people-to-people encounters undoubtedly leave deep impressions and will result in a better understanding of Israel's place in the region. Exactly 1 week ago, I was in Jerusalem to participate at Beit Hanassi upon the invitation of President Ruvi Rivlin, and it was already mentioned, at a meeting of special envoys on anti-Semitism from the US, France, Germany, UK, and the EU, and you met my counterpart Ilan Kar last night. We discussed the current challenges in the fight against anti-Semitism and how to strengthen our cooperation. As those of you from ELNET who were there will testify, the President reiterated, and I could not agree more, that anti-Semitism is not only a threat to the Jews, but to humanity as a whole. It is in this vein that we understand our mission at the European Commission in the fight against anti-Semitism. This conference happens at a significant moment. 81 years ago, the Nazi regime ordered a concentrated pogrom against Jewish communities. Hundreds of Jewish people were murdered that night. Synagogues were burnt down, and thousands of Jewish-owned businesses and houses were looted. The November 1938 pogrom was carried out in plain sight, seen by everyone, by citizens, foreign diplomats, and the world. But the world, just like most neighbors, remained silent. The silence of the bystanders that Elie Wiesel denounced had the effect of a blanco check to the Nazis. It paved the way to the extermination camps. What does this mean for us today, at an age where synagogues and other Jewish premises are once again under attack? One might have thought that anti-Semitism finally ceased after the Shoah, but we all know that instead we developed new forms of Jew hatred while preserving all the old forms. This new anti-Semitism does not exist despite, but because of Auschwitz. Because some cannot forgive the Jews what they did to Europe. This form of anti-Semitism seems to me particularly pernicious and painful to the Jewish communities. According to a survey that we did among 16,500 Jewish people in Europe last year, Holocaust remembrance is the #1 factor when it comes to defining their Jewish identity. This is hardly surprising for who has not lost family members in the Shoah. At the same time, a CNN study last December revealed that 1/3 of Europeans know little to nothing about the Holocaust, and 1 in 20 has never heard of Auschwitz. And our own Eurobarometer that we did among 27,000 Europeans in January this year showed that 4 in 10 Europeans do not consider Holocaust denial a problem. There is an enormous gap between the perception of the Jewish community and the general perception. The other important factor of Jewish identity in Europe today, according to our surveys, but also according to the many conversations that I've had with Jewish Europeans over the past years, is the support for Israel. Support for Israel as Eretz Israel, independently of its government. And as First Vice President Timmermans said at the Grand Synagogue in Brussels last year, the existence of the State of Israel is the ultimate triumph over the attempt to eliminate the Jewish nation. There will now always be a homeland where every Jew is safe. It is important to explain this fact, because the two post-Shoah forms of anti-Semitism, right-wing Holocaust trivialization by false comparisons, as well as left-wing anti-Zionist ideas that the existence of the State of Israel in itself is a racist endeavor, go right to the heart of Jewish identity in Europe today. And when you feel that your identity is endangered in a certain environment, you start thinking about leaving before you suffocate. Since 2014, for the first time since World War II, the overall number of Jewish citizens in Europe is declining. In France, it has been declining, as you know, for many years. And we know whenever Jews feel threatened and when they feel the need to leave Europe, it has always been bad for Europe. Europe itself is under threat. Finally, there's much talk in Europe about imported anti-Semitism. The truth is, anti-Semitism in Europe has existed long before Muslim immigration. Those who point to immigration as the main source of anti-Semitism conveniently neglect the plank in their own eye. Yet, we must not close our eyes. We are aware that the Muslim population in Europe harbor, on average, 2 to 3 times higher anti-Semitic prejudices. This must be addressed, and member states committed to doing so in the Council Declaration on Anti-Semitism, which was adopted in December 2018. Accepting Jewish life is a sign for a healthy society, and it's a benchmark for successful integration. We have seen too often that poisonous thoughts lead to hateful acts. Whether those thoughts come wrapped as anti-Zionism and result in shouting at Alain Finkielkraut to go back home. After all, in some EU member states, up to 85% see the Jewish community in their country through the lens of the Middle East conflict. Or whether it is simply the traditional Nazi ideology that can lead to desecrating Jewish cemeteries, like we saw over the weekend again in Denmark at the occasion of pogrom night. Or it is spray painting letterboxes with the counterfeit of Holocaust survivor Simone Weil, with swastikas, and even anti-Semitic homicides by Islamists and right-wing extremists. And finally, we see a rise in conspiracy myths of the Jews being the source of all evil that motivated the perpetrator of the attack on the synagogue in Halle. In Europe, we are determined to turn this pernicious deed into positive action. On the day of the attack, Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker called upon all Europeans to stand up against anti-Semitism and stand in solidarity with the Jewish community. Halle must be remembered for being a turning point in how we Europeans and the European society as a whole sees and addresses anti-Semitism. There has been progress, as many of you know, but we must step up further our efforts. The public space must not be left to extremists and radicals. The middle of society must be strengthened and encouraged to raise their voices, and this is in the interest of our democracies. So what does this mean in concrete terms? And I come to the second part of my speech, which will look at the very concrete initiatives and instruments that we have taken. On European level, we have exploited almost all instruments that we have at hand. In 2017, the European Parliament adopted a resolution against anti-Semitism. In 2018, all EU member states adopted unanimously a declaration against anti-Semitism in which they listed all the different areas in which they were going to act. And this includes the adoption of the IRA definition that was adopted in 2016. It includes education, data collection by the police, proper training of law enforcement on anti-Semitism, integration measures that should include preventive measures on anti-Semitism, all these different forms. So it is a very complete declaration that can be a guiding tool if member states want to actually create action that will be tangible on the ground. We also use project funding and support for structural change in the member states. And finally, member states have committed to adopting national strategies against anti-Semitism. And we at the European Commission support this process by bringing together representatives from the member states with representatives of their own Jewish community in the member state. Actually, we had the first meeting in June on security. So basically, security experts from the member states and security experts from the Jewish community. And to my astonishment, some of the Jewish community representatives came up afterwards to say that this was for the first time that they actually had time to spend with their national authorities. What we think is that you need to do joint risk assessment. The costs cannot be left to the member states. You need to put measures to the Jewish communities. It's the state that is responsible for the security of the citizens. And so all of this was discussed at that meeting, and we will hold now similar meetings on education of Jewish life, so the triangular Jewish life, anti-Semitism, and knowledge of the Shoah and remembrance to see in how far this can be embedded in curricula. It is a long-term process, but it is something I think that is absolutely necessary. And the third focus we will put is on the implementation of the IRA definition. Because it's very clear that the IRA definition, the adoption, is very good, but it's only a first step. It will change nothing if action doesn't follow, which means we need training for law enforcement authorities to actually understand what this definition means. It's a good, legally non-binding tool, and actually often it's said that the fact that it's legally non-binding is weak, but I think it's actually its strength, because by having it legally non-binding, it can be used in a much broader way, also for civil society, for teachers, for sports clubs, for parents' associations. It serves as an example of what kind of forms of anti-Semitism we see today, and from that, then specific action can follow in the legal system, for example, or when it comes to schools. First, you need to recognize that something is anti-Semitic in order to be able to tackle it. But that also means, for example, that we need trainers who are capable of training the IRA definition in the different languages of the EU. It's not so difficult to find trainers in French, German, or English, but we need it also in Portuguese and in Estonian and in many other countries. And I think also that the IRA definition can teach, especially law enforcement authorities, how dangerous anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are to democracy. And I think that's that's the most important aspect of it in the end. It will be very difficult to roll back anti-Semitism if we don't manage to make the internet a space that is not left to hate mongers, because there is a clear link between hate speech online and hate crime in the real world. Halle was the last example. We used to think that our children are safe as long as they were in their rooms, but nowadays they may well be out there in the virtual world, exposed to toxic ideologies and hate speech. We need to enforce rules that offer no tolerance to intolerance. Existing legislation already criminalizes incitement to hatred and violence on European soil, including Holocaust denial and distortion. This is often not known. Many people still call for legislation to criminalize Holocaust denial, but in fact, it is already Europe-wide criminalized. However, this needs to be enforced, and it needs to be enforced offline as much as online. We created a code of conduct in 2016 with the big IT companies, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, YouTube, and by now a lot of others have joined, Facebook, Instagram, many others, where they commit to take down within 24 hours all illegal hate speech, so illegal according to this European legislation that is flagged to them. And when we started in 2016, only 28% of flagged content was actually removed. Now we are at 72%. So there is a big improvement. There has been capacity building, increase of understanding of what is legal on European soil. This is all only for Europe. Huh? We talk about a geo-blocking of this content. We cannot, under the current legal system, go to the source and actually request the total eradication of certain content. But it must not be visible on European soil, and the internet as a public space here must be in conformity with European legislation. We also saw that there was already some sort of improvement given the fact that the video that was done by the perpetrator of the attack on Halle was actually taken down within a few hours. The original video was taken down within half an hour, and then the copies that had already been made, or the spreads that took a few more hours, but we see it as a first success that this relatively small internet platform reacted rather quickly and successfully. And then finally, like in the real world, also internet perpetrators need to be brought to justice. This again means capacity building among law enforcement authorities, like it is already the case in some member states, including, for example, here in France. The Commission has been investing in better preventing and addressing all forms of radical extremism. This includes, among other things, the support for local and national governments with developing local action plans to prevent right-wing violent extremism, including exit and de-radicalization programs. Close cooperation between Europol and the EU member states will be key to further advance this work. And we have also proposed new legislation that is currently being discussed between the Council, the Parliament, and the Commission that requests internet firms within 1 hour of public order to take down terrorist content. And this is in a way a change of liability. As you know, so far the platforms are seen as platforms, which means they don't fall under the media regulations of liability, but in that case the liability is with the platforms to actually proactively take terrorist content down. And last but not least, President-elect of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, committed to further strengthen initiatives combating anti-Semitism and illegal hate speech online when she stated in the Parliament that, and I quote, "A new Digital Service Act will upgrade our liability and safety rules for digital platforms, services and products and complete the digital single market." Last but not least, education remains the most effective preventive tool. And by that, I mean education in a holistic sense. Beyond learning facts, we need to educate the heart. Or as Albert Einstein put it, education is what remains when you have forgotten what you've learned at school. It is essential to instill empathy and a clear compass in the young generation so that they will have the courage to speak up against injustice, and we will need to lead by example. In the EU, education is to a large extent a responsibility of the member states. However, I already mentioned that we have this EU working group on anti-Semitism between member states and Jewish communities, and we will focus on education now in December to support member states and to show them what is already out there. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. They have to apply things that are already there. There's actually a lot out there in terms of content and in terms of structure, but it needs to be applied. Finally, I will mention to you a few funding tools, just so you know. We also support, on the one side, remembrance of the Shoah. We have a Europe for Citizens program where annually 3.5 million are invested in keeping the European memory of the Shoah alive. We are financing the European Holocaust research infrastructure with 10 million euro, which brings together different research institutes with Yad Vashem also in the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and they invest a lot into digitalizing archives. So also, for example, researchers in Poland that might have problems to access certain information under given circumstances can, through these tools, actually access archives that may concern their own country. Last month, we awarded 2 million in funding to very concrete projects on tackling modern forms of anti-Semitism, including also, again, the educational angle in Germany, Bulgaria, Hungary, and also France. And we're supporting a network of Muslim organizations that fight anti-Semitism, that reach out specifically to Muslim youth. Ladies and gentlemen, the 9th of November is a fateful day in German history. It was not only the day of pogrom night in 1938. It was also the day when exactly 30 years ago the Berlin Wall fell, and shortly after the Iron Curtain. I grew up 20 kilometers from the Iron Curtain in Bavaria, and to see that curtain fall really changed my life. And I witnessed that unthinkable change can happen. And it is that same hope and also knowledge and witness of the fact that you see something change 180 degrees that I believe that also with regards to the fight of anti-Semitism, we can see a 180-degree change. Even if it seems impossible, change can happen, because we cannot change history, but the lessons of history can change us. Thank you very much.